The glass doors of Veyra Tower shattered the morning silence with a hiss as they slid open, and a man stumbled backward through them, nearly tripping over his own feet, his face burning red while 40 pairs of eyes from the lobby watched him go. A small boy, no older than 7, gripped his hand tightly and looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Behind them, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Show yourself out, and don't waste my company's time again." That voice belonged to Celeste Marlowe, the most feared CEO in the country, a woman who had built an empire out of cold calculation and zero mercy. But what nobody in that lobby knew, what not even Celeste herself knew yet, was that the man she had just humiliated in front of her entire board was about to unravel a secret buried so deep it had been classified for over a decade. And the man standing 2 feet behind her, the quiet bodyguard who rarely spoke, was the only person alive who could recognize the truth etched into that stranger's skin. If you love stories where power meets a secret nobody saw coming, hit that subscribe button right now, because this one is going to keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. 3 hours earlier, the city had just woken up. Veyra Tower stood like a monument of glass and steel in the heart of downtown, 52 floors of polished ambition reflecting the morning sun. Inside, on the top floor, Celeste Marlowe sat behind an obsidian desk reviewing quarterly projections with the focus of someone who had never once allowed herself to be distracted by anything as trivial as feelings. She was 36 years old, sharp-jawed, immaculately dressed, and known throughout the industry for one simple rule: weakness was not tolerated in her presence. Her bodyguard, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Daniel Reyes, stood near the window with his arms folded, scanning the street below out of habit rather than necessity. Daniel had served 11 years in an elite military unit before retiring quietly into private security work. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and he noticed everything. The way Celeste tapped her pen when she was irritated, the way her assistant flinched before delivering bad news, the way the city moved beneath them like a clock no one controlled but her. "Ms. Marlowe," her assistant said, stepping into the office with a tablet pressed to her chest. "Your 9 o'clock is here, the logistics consultant." Celeste didn't look up. "Send him in. 5 minutes, that's all he gets." Down in the lobby, a man named Elias Carter stood waiting, his hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. Elias was 41, with calloused hands and tired eyes that still held a flicker of quiet determination. His clothes were clean but modest, a sharp contrast to the tailored suits gliding past him. His son Noah clutched a small backpack and looked around the towering lobby with wide-eyed wonder. "Daddy, this place is so big," Noah whispered. Elias knelt down for a moment, smoothing the boy's hair. "Just a little longer, buddy. Daddy needs to talk to some people about a job, okay? Then we'll get ice cream." Noah nodded eagerly, and Elias stood, straightening his jacket, his nerves carefully hidden beneath a calm exterior. He had spent the last 6 months developing a logistics optimization model that could save companies like Veyra millions, knowledge he'd built from experience nobody in that building could imagine. But today, all that mattered was getting his foot in the door. A single father raising a son alone needed every opportunity he could get. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, Elias stepped into the boardroom, Noah trailing quietly behind him, settling into a chair near the door as instructed by an assistant. Inside, 6 board members sat around a long table, and at the head of it sat Celeste Marlowe, her expression unreadable, her eyes already dismissive before he'd said a single word. "Mr. Carter, is it?" she said, glancing briefly at a folder in front of her. "You have 5 minutes." Elias nodded, opening his laptop with steady hands despite the pounding in his chest. "Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Marlowe. I've developed a logistics routing system that could reduce your delivery costs by up to 18% within the first year. I've tested the model using publicly available shipping data from." "Stop," Celeste said, holding up a hand. "Before you continue, I want to understand who I'm dealing with. Your firm, what is it called?" "I work independently," Elias said. "I don't have a firm, not yet." A small, humorless smile crept across her lips. "Independent, no firm, no track record I can find. No credentials listed beyond a community college certification from years ago." She tapped the folder. "Mr. Carter, do you understand what kind of company this is? We don't gamble on garage-built ideas from men with no corporate history." "With respect," Elias said carefully, "the model speaks for itself. If you'd allow me to walk through the data." "I've seen enough data in my life to know when something doesn't add up," she interrupted again, her voice sharpening. "What I see in front of me is a man who shows up to a board meeting with his child in tow, because he likely couldn't afford a babysitter. A man who can't even organize his own life walking in here to tell me how to organize a billion-dollar logistics network. Do you understand how that looks? The room went silent. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Daniel, standing near the wall, felt his jaw tighten, though his face remained neutral, trained for stillness even when something inside him wanted to react. Elias' hands stayed steady on the laptop, though something in his eyes flickered, not anger, but a deep, practiced patience. My son is here because his school had a half day today, and I didn't have anyone else to watch him. That doesn't change the quality of the work. It changes everything, Celeste snapped, standing now, her voice rising with the kind of cold authority that had silenced boardrooms for years. We don't take risks on people who can't even manage their own life. This meeting is over. Ms. Marlowe, if I could just have 2 more minutes to. Show yourself out, she said, her tone final, absolute, and don't waste my company's time again. For a moment, Elias didn't move. The room held its breath, waiting to see if he would argue, plead, or break. Instead, he simply closed his laptop with a quiet click, stood and looked at her, not with anger but with something far heavier, something like pity. Thank you for your time, he said evenly and turned to his son. Come on, Noah, let's go. Noah slipped off his chair and reached for his father's hand, glancing nervously at the woman who had just yelled. As they walked toward the door, Elias' sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a jagged, precise scar running along his forearm, the kind of scar that didn't come from an accident, but from a surgeon's blade, deliberate and clean. Daniel's eyes locked onto it instantly. His breath caught in his throat. He had seen that exact scar pattern before, not on a stranger, on a man he had once called Commander. If you're starting to feel that chill of recognition too, drop a comment below telling us where you think this story is headed, because trust me, it gets bigger than you think. Daniel said nothing as Elias and Noah walked past him toward the elevator. He kept his composure, his training holding his expression flat, but inside, his mind was racing through 11 years of buried memory. He watched the elevator doors close on the man and his son, and for several long seconds, he simply stood there, staring at the space where they had been. Daniel, Celeste said, sitting back down at the head of the table, already moving on, get the next file ready. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly, though his voice felt distant even to himself. That night after his shift ended, Daniel sat alone in his apartment with his laptop open, scrolling through old encrypted files he hadn't touched in years, files from a chapter of his life he rarely spoke about. He had served under covert rescue unit designated Shadow 11, a team trained for extractions too sensitive for public record. Their commander had been a man known only by the call sign, Wraith, a leader who had pulled Daniel out of a collapsed building under heavy fire during a mission gone catastrophically wrong. That mission had ended with Wraith disappearing. Officially, he had died in the field, his body never recovered. Unofficially, rumors had circulated for years that he had survived, that something about the extraction had gone wrong on purpose, that powerful people wanted the truth buried along with whatever happened that night. Daniel pulled up an old photograph, grainy and half-redacted, showing his former commander mid-mission, sleeve torn, forearm exposed, a fresh surgical scar visible beneath dried blood. He zoomed in. It was identical, the same pattern, the same precise lines. It can't be him, Daniel whispered to the empty room, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the screen. It can't be. But deep down, every instinct he had ever trusted was screaming that it was. Meanwhile, across the city, in the penthouse suite atop Veyra Tower, Celeste Marlowe sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. The skyline glittered beyond the windows, but she barely noticed it. Her phone buzzed with a message from her head of security. Unusual activity flagged on archived case files. Possible breach attempt, reviewing now. Old security threats resurfacing, the message read beneath it, vague and unsettling. She frowned, setting the phone down, rubbing her temples. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, her mind kept drifting back to the man from that morning, Elias Carter, the way he had looked at her before leaving. Not afraid, not angry, just sad, as if he knew something about her that she didn't know about herself. She shook the thought away, telling herself it was nothing, that she had simply enforced standards the way she always did. But the unease lingered, curling at the edges of her mind like smoke she couldn't quite see the source of. If this story is giving you goosebumps already, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to see how this unfolds. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office earlier than usual, his mind still tangled in the threads of the previous night. He requested a private meeting with Celeste before her schedule filled, and she granted him 10 minutes, mildly curious about his uncharacteristically serious tone. "What is it, Daniel?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The man you spoke with yesterday, Elias Carter." "What about him?" "I think I know who he is, or at least who he might have been." Celeste raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "He's an unemployed consultant with a kid and no firm. That's who he is." "I served in the military for 11 years, Ms. Marlowe, Special Operations. I saw a scar on his arm yesterday, a surgical scar, very specific, very deliberate. It matched the profile of a commander I served under, a man we called Wraith. He was presumed dead after a failed extraction mission years ago." For a moment, something flickered across Celeste's face, not quite recognition, but a strange unease, as if a word she didn't understand had brushed against something buried in her memory. She blinked it away quickly. "Or he's just another desperate applicant with an old scar from some unrelated accident," she said dismissively. "Daniel, I appreciate your concern, but I don't have time for conspiracy theories." "With respect, ma'am, that mission, the one Wraith disappeared on, it involved an extraction of civilians. A prominent family was caught in the crossfire during a targeted attack. The records were sealed at the highest level." Celeste's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What family?" "The file was redacted. I never had clearance to know the details, but I remember the date. I remember it was around the same time your father's company faced that security crisis, the one nobody ever talks about." The room went quiet. Celeste's expression hardened, but beneath the hardness something cracked, just slightly, like ice beginning to splinter under pressure. "That's enough," she said, standing abruptly. "I don't know what you're trying to imply, but I won't entertain it without proof." "I'm not implying anything," Daniel said calmly. "I'm telling you what I saw, and I think you should look into it before dismissing it." She stared at him for a long moment, torn between her instinct to shut the conversation down and a deeper, more unsettling pull toward the truth. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "Fine, pull whatever footage or files you have access to, discreetly. I want to see what you're talking about before I waste another second on this." Daniel nodded and left her office, his pulse quickening with the weight of what he was about to uncover. That afternoon, using old contacts and carefully guarded credentials, Daniel accessed archived military footage he hadn't viewed in years. He sat alone in a secured room, scrolling through grainy black and white surveillance clips from the night of the failed extraction. The footage showed chaos, gunfire, smoke, civilians running through a collapsing structure. And there in the center of it all was Wraith, carrying 2 children through the wreckage, his uniform torn, blood soaking through the fabric near his forearm. Daniel paused the footage and zoomed in. The scar was unmistakable. He kept watching, his chest tightening as the footage showed Wraith handing the children off to another soldier, before turning back into the burning building to pull out more survivors. The last clear shot of him showed his face, dirt-streaked and exhausted, eyes burning with a desperate kind of resolve. It was Elias Carter's face, younger, harder, but unmistakably the same man. "He didn't die," Daniel whispered to himself, his voice trembling slightly. "He disappeared." And as he dug deeper into the file metadata, a name flashed briefly across a corrupted document before the system blocked further access, a name tied to the family who had been extracted that night. Marlowe. Daniel sat back in his chair, his blood running cold. The mission that had supposedly killed his commander wasn't some random extraction. It was tied directly to Celeste's family, to her past, to something that had clearly been buried so deep that even she didn't remember it. This was no coincidence. This was a thread connecting 2 lives that had collided again, years later, in a boardroom where one humiliated the other without ever knowing the truth. If your jaw just dropped like ours did writing this, comment below with one word that describes how you're feeling right now. We want to see your reactions as this story unfolds. Later that evening, Celeste sat in her office reviewing the confidential background check she had ordered on Elias Carter, expecting it to confirm Daniel's theory as nothing more than an overactive imagination. Instead, what she found unsettled her far more than she expected. There were no financial records older than 8 years, no employment history, no corporate footprint, no tax filings, no social media presence predating a certain date. It was as if Elias Carter, as a person, had simply appeared out of nowhere less than a decade ago. The only flag that appeared in the system was a sealed military file, deeply buried, marked with a clearance designation she didn't recognize. Classified level black. Her hand hovered over the screen, her usual composure faltering for the first time in longer than she could remember. She had built her entire identity around control, around knowing everything before anyone else did. But here was a man she had publicly humiliated, a man with no past she could find, connected to a clearance level so restricted that even her resources couldn't break through it. She thought back to the meeting, the way he had looked at her before leaving, calm and unshaken despite her cruelty. The way something about his eyes had felt strangely, impossibly familiar, like a half-remembered dream she couldn't quite grasp. "We don't take risks on people who can't even manage their own life," she had told him. The words echoed differently now, hollow and ugly in her own ears. What had felt like authority in the moment now felt like ignorance, like she had stood in front of something far bigger than herself and dismissed it out of nothing but arrogance. She closed the file, her hands trembling slightly, and for the first time in years, Celeste Marlowe felt the unfamiliar, uncomfortable sensation of fear. Daniel found Elias the following evening, just outside the city limits, in a quiet park where the noise of downtown faded into the rustle of trees and the distant laughter of children playing nearby. Elias sat on a bench, watching Noah climb a small jungle gym, his expression calm, almost peaceful, despite everything that had happened the day before. Daniel approached slowly, his hands visible, his posture deliberately non-threatening. Elias noticed him immediately, old instincts that never fully faded, but he didn't tense up. He simply watched him approach with quiet recognition. "You found me," Elias said, not turning his head. "It wasn't hard," Daniel replied, stopping a few feet away. "Once I knew what I was looking for." Elias finally turned, studying Daniel's face carefully, searching for something in his features. And then, slowly, recognition flickered in his eyes, not surprise, but something heavier, something like resignation. "Shadow 11, Elias said quietly, "you were one of mine." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The weight of years collapsed into the silence between them, a silence built from a mission that had ended in fire and blood, and a disappearance that had haunted Daniel for over a decade. "Sir," Daniel finally said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "you shouldn't have come back here." Elias looked out at his son, who was laughing as he slid down the small slide, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation happening just feet away. "I didn't come back for her," Elias said quietly. He turned his gaze to Noah, watching him with the kind of love that had clearly defined every choice he'd made for the past several years. "I came back because of him." The words hung heavy in the evening air, carrying the weight of an entire hidden history, one that connected a buried mission, a missing commander, a billionaire's forgotten past, and a child who, without knowing it, might hold the key to truths that powerful people had spent years trying to erase. Daniel didn't ask any more questions. He simply nodded, understanding that some answers weren't his to demand, not yet. He turned and walked back toward the city, his mind already racing toward what would have to come next, toward the conversation he would have to have with Celeste, toward the truth that was about to collide with her world, whether she was ready for it or not. Behind him, Elias watched the sun begin to set, his son's laughter ringing through the quiet park, unaware that the past he had spent years running from had just found him again. And somewhere across the city, in a glass office 52 floors above the ground, Celeste Marlowe stared out at the skyline, the sealed file still open on her screen, a single question echoing through her mind that she couldn't yet answer. Who was Elias Carter, really, and why did some forgotten part of her feel like she already knew? If this story had you holding your breath, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because the truth about that classified mission, the Marlowe family's hidden past, and the real reason Elias came back is only just beginning to surface. Drop a comment telling us who you think Elias really is, hit like if you want part 2, and share this with someone who loves a good twist, because trust me, this story is far from over.